And outrage continues to boil days after convicted rapist Brock Turner walked out of a county jail 3 months ahead of schedule. You remember this case. The former Stanford swimmer served just half of a sentence many people said was way too lenient to begin with. Police now are stepping up security outside his home as protesters threaten him and his parents. They're not happy. And the effort to recall the judge who sentenced him continues as well. Now, 2 bills sit on the California governor's desk aimed at preventing something like this from happening in the future. One would broaden California's definition of rape. The other, more controversial, would impose mandatory minimum sentences for sexual assaults and rapes. The ACLU and other groups oppose this, saying such guidelines are unfair to minorities, who often plead out to a longer sentence than defendants who can afford a prolonged trial. Let's talk about this. Our legal panel is here. Wendy Patrick is a veteran prosecutor, and Bob Bianchi, a criminal defense attorney and former head of the county prosecutor. Both are trial attorneys. So good to have you here.
Thanks,
this
Laura.
is an issue that has obviously caused so many people great concern. Wendy, many people are still trying to wrap their heads around how this short sentence really could have happened in the first place. We know there are efforts to change the laws. We just talked about that, which would allow for harsher sentences. But why wasn't there a stronger law in the book in the first place?
Right. So, Laura, this is yet another case where the court of public opinion disagrees with the court of law. How does that happen is the question. What we want to see is the punishment fit the crime. So here is the issue in a case like this. And I know people are saying Judge Persky should have an early release, and they're basically saying that notwithstanding the fact that he has judicial independence, the legal toolbox available to him should have been different. What do I mean by that? There was no force used in this crime. Horrific crime, but without force.
The woman was unconscious.
That's right. So it didn't qualify for a mandatory prison sentence. If it had, and remember that's the assembly bill that was proposed last Monday, if it had, the judge's hands would have been tied. So even if he believed it was a case that he would have liked to grant probation, he couldn't have, because that would have been the law. And that is one of the cases. This is another example of how legislation stems from litigation, and that's no doubt what's going to happen here.
And one of the things, Bob, that has come up is the idea of racial bias in this case. Judge Aaron Persky said he gave Brock Turner the recommended 6-month sentence due to the, quote, severe impact state prison would have had on Turner with his background, meaning he had no criminal background before to speak of. So, what do you think about that? Racial bias in this case?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this happen many times as a prosecutor. It's very disconcerting. I'm not trying to say that this individual judge was a racist, but the fact of the matter is that this kid came from privilege. He had all the advantages, education, opportunities to move forward in his life, and he is being sentenced to something that the judge says that it's going to have an impact upon him because of the great things that he did in his life. What about the minority person that doesn't have the same educational background or opportunity, or maybe an intact family, or didn't have the same? He should get a harsher sentence. I've dealt with this as the prosecutor many times, and it's offensive to me that with a case of this significance, where this woman was brutally raped, this judge, it's true, there wasn't a mandatory sentence, and we're talking about that today. There should be a mandatory sentence, but this judge still had the opportunity to sentence him up to 10 years in jail. And to sit there and say, based upon the family he comes from and his background, you're basically saying people with an affluent background don't go to jail, people with not that kind of affluent background do. It's disgraceful to me.
All right, we've only got a minute left. Wendy, there's been a massive recall effort to get rid of this judge, while Judge Persky himself has launched a campaign to keep himself in play. Now you've got Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez going after him, other lawmakers. What do you think should happen?
I'll tell you, this is a very divisive issue, but we want qualified lawyers to want to become judges. And so it's tricky. I mean, you could argue both sides of this. On the one hand, we have to respect judicial independence. On the other, we've got to arm them with the tools that will enable or prevent unjust sentences from being rendered.
Bob, should the judge stay or go?
He should go, and I'm going to tell you another reason why he should go. To be sitting there putting a website together where he is now trying to get the court of public opinion. Listen, we work in courts where we deal with law and facts. That is completely outrageous, and on that alone he should go.
Wendy, Bob, thank you so much for your perspective. It's important to keep this issue out there because it's still ongoing.
You bet.
Thank you to you both.
Thanks, Laura.
All right, John.